What does your character want? And so then out of that, I go through this exercise. I did not come up with this. This is something I stole from an author called Michael Cardos. And this is from his book called The Art and Craft of Fiction. And he calls it the Motivational Continuum. And this is a really simple concept, but if you work through it on your own, it can really help you get to the root of your story. So if you think about your day-to-day life, most of us live in the world of expectation, which is right at the center of the motivational continuum. So the motivational continuum is going to start at expectation, then it's going to move out. And I'll tell you about the different pieces as we go. So expectation is, I had an interview today with Maddie at 10 o'clock. I had to show up. That was the expectation. I have a manuscript due to my editor in a couple months. I have to make that deadline and get that manuscript to him. That's the expectation. So most of us spend most of our lives in expectation. I mean, it's not the most interesting place, but it's actually the place that you spend most of your life. And that's the issue with character motivation. So if you've got a character who's living in expectation, it's not a very interesting story. So if you move away from expectation, right outside of the expectation, you're going to get fears and you're going to get hopes. And this is sometimes where you'll land with your character motivation as well. It's definitely more interesting than expectation, but it's not pushing the boundaries as much as you want to. So I actually just had to run an errand before this webinar today. So I had a fear that I was going to be late for it, but me being late for a webinar is not an interesting story. And I also hope that you guys are going to enjoy this content today, but that is not interesting enough. It's just not an interesting story. So you can think about your fears and your hopes, and everyone has those in your own life. I was just mentioning my manuscript. So I often have a fear that I'm not going to make my deadline and get the manuscript to my editor. And lo and behold, generally I'll write to my editor and say, I'm not going to make my deadline. And he generally says, take an extra month to finish it. So there's no interesting story there, right?
Interesting for people who are plugging with editors. Now they're all making a note saying, oh, look, you can ask for an extension.
Oh, you can always ask for an extension, but you cannot write a novel about asking for an extension.
No.
It's just not interesting enough. So you go out from expectations to fears and hopes. And then if you go a little bit further away from fears and hopes, you get to dreams and dreads. And that's really where you want to find the center of your story. And that's where you're going to find that character motivation that makes the story really, really interesting.